And this is an introduction to the project and to how you can contribute to it. As an introduction to the slave deed research, People Not Property, Slave Deeds of North Carolina was a 3-year project led by UNCG University Libraries and funded by the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, which is under the auspices of the National Archives. The initial phase of the project has been running from October 2018 to September 2021. And as that funding phase comes to a close, work is continuing across the state in collaboration with local universities and registered deeds offices. Results are being integrated into the larger Digital Library on American Slavery and other large-scale projects such as Enslaved.org. Deeds will be searchable based on the transcription of key information about slaveholders and enslaved people, as well as dates and locations. The Digital Library on American Slavery is also a project of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. It can be found at library.uncg.edu/slavery. It includes the Race and Slavery Petitions Project, which is transcriptions of court cases that involved enslaved people and free people of color. It is national in scope, covering all slave territories. The Runaway Slave Advertisements Project is North Carolina-based. It is a digitization of ads that mention freedom seekers, also called historically runaway slaves, across the state, and People Not Property, which is the current Slave Deeds Project. We also have a link to the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, which is a project out of Emory University that provides voyage information and interactive maps on slave trade voyages globally. This is what the website will look like. We're currently importing deed information, so you can see that you have the document number, county, date, where the document is found, data on the transaction itself, the people involved, what their role in the document is, age if it's given, race if it's given, and gender if it's given. And then also data can be exported in CSV and JSON, and the original deed can be downloaded as a JPEG. At the Digital Library on American Slavery site, you can also search across these 3 platforms. So if you were looking for someone with a specific name, in a specific date range, and in a specific area, you could in one go search across these platforms to find all mentions of that person. So a slave deed is a property deed registered with county governments that records transactions in which enslaved people are named. So this deed, for example, made the 3rd of March, 1820 in Orange County, documents the sale of a 16-year-old boy named Cubit from William Thompson to Nicholas Thompson. To access the deed books, if you're working at your local Register of Deeds office, you may work directly from the books, but you can also access them online through the Family Search website with a free account. So you just have to sign up with an email address, and it's free of charge, and the links will be provided by the project organizers to get you directly to the books. So you can navigate through the pages here. There are page numbers, which are different than image numbers. So the image numbers we disregard, that's internal to Family Search. When you're recording book and page number, you'll want to look at the page numbers that are written on the deed book pages. There are some tools at the top right where you can adjust settings. If the deeds are hard to read, you can adjust the brightness and contrast. And then if you are doing image acquisition, the download button would be of interest. So the first step in the process is finding these slave deeds. They're mixed in with other types of deeds in the deed books. Other types of deeds are largely land deeds. And the locate and label phase is just going through each book page by page and identifying slave deeds. So once you find one, as in this example from Craven County, you'll have the book or volume number and enter the page number, and then assign it a document ID. That document ID is designed so that each deed can be, the original can be found based on just the document ID. So it includes the county code, which is a 3-letter abbreviation for the county, the book or volume number or letter, the page number, and then if there are multiple deeds on the page, they will be numbered. So the document ID for the first slave deed in Book 9, page 340 in Guilford County is GUI.9.340.1. There are sometimes multiple deeds on a page. So for example, this deed began on page 219. So it's orange.18.219.2. The first full deed on page 220 is 18.220.1. The second deed on page 220 is 18.220.2. Identifying slave deeds will be slow going at first, but it does get easier. The deeds are wordy legal documents, but for the most part, they have a very repetitive structure. So once you get familiar with that structure, it becomes a pretty quick process to skim through and pick out the deeds that are relevant to enslaved people. My advice is not to read the deeds word for word. Just try to figure out what the transaction is. Is it land, livestock, enslaved people, and move on if it's not relevant. And there are some clues that will help you identify slave deeds more quickly. Instead of reading the whole document, you can look for keywords. Useful keywords are Negro and slave. So for example, we have kind of the intro text here, and then 2 young Negroes of the following description. Also looking for names. Here's name Jim, about 12 years of age. So if there are first names showing up in the middle of the deed, the phrases years old or years of age can indicate an enslaved person, but sometimes used with livestock. And also, enslaved persons were far more expensive than most land sales. So if you see a large amount of money, $200, $1,000, anything in between or over, that can be a clue that you should look for enslaved people within the document. So some deeds are very short. You can kind of zoom in pretty quickly on what's being sold. These are both slave deeds. In longer deeds, what's being sold kind of shows up in the middle, or at least after the first quarter. The first quarter of the deeds is this kind of repetitive, to all whom these presents shall come, know that I of this state and county are selling to this person of that state and county, blah, blah, blah. Then you get to really the relevant part. So you can usually skip over this first part and start looking in the middle for what is being bought, sold, or gifted here. This is another example just of how this important information, what's going to clue you into, is this a slave deed or not a slave deed, kind of shows up toward the middle. So I will go through and try and find the phrase also have given, granted, bargained, sold, and assigned. Again, wordy legal documents. But when you can find that hath this day bargained, sold, assigned, and given over, shortly after that, you will find what they are transferring with the deed. If downloading deeds is part of your assignment, you will either download the deeds as you locate them, or you'll be provided with a list to download. And formatting, this box should be over the download button, but there's the download button just above. So you use the download button on the family search screen to save the image, and the name of the file will be the document ID .jpg or .jpeg, depending on how your computer assigns that suffix. If the deed is on multiple pages, you'll download all of the pages using the same document ID. So in our example, Guilford.9.340.1, and then ABC to the suffix so that they don't have the same file name. So if this deed were on 3 pages, you would have .1A, 1B, 1C, and those will be combined in an image editing process later. As an example, the deed on the right is from Orange County Book 18. It started on page 219 and carries over to page 220. So its document ID is orange.18.219.1A, orange.18.219.1B. And at a later date, they were just lumped into one image for the website. This brings us to transcription. If you are transcribing information from the slave deeds, you'll be provided with a spreadsheet. The volunteer handbook goes into more detail on how this transcription is done, but I'm going to provide an overview now. So the first set of data is the document data. So this is where is this document located? County, county code, book or volume, page, and document ID, as well as document type. The document types are defined in the handbook. The most common is a bill of sale. So this is just a receipt for a sale. You will have a price paid, generally a large amount, and some combination of the words given, granted, bargain, sold, sell. The second most common type is a deed of trust. And in this case, there will be a lengthy discussion of debt. The first party owes money to the third party, and so is putting up property as a collateral. So stands lawfully indebted to or is earnestly desirous to settle this debt. If there's a mention of a debt, you're dealing with a deed of trust. In a deed of gift, there's little or no money. The grantor usually gives over or gives grants and delivers enslaved people to the grantee. The words natural love and affection are often used, and there may be a small amount of money. So if it's $1, a shilling, $5, it's often a deed of gift. Similarly, there's often a monetary exchange of a small amount between $1 and $10 for a deed of trust. Marriage contracts are another type of deed that involves enslaved people. A married woman's property became her husband's legal property upon marriage. Married women did not retain property rights unless an arrangement was made for one of her male relatives to be a trustee. So if you're seeing an intended marriage mentioned, that woman is then the grantor, and the male relative to whom she's entrusting the property is the grantee. That would generally be to protect the wife's property from any excesses the husband may be engaged in so that her children would inherit. The last will and testament is probably the most familiar document of the slave deeds. It will include the words last will and testament, sometimes phrases like being of sound mind and body, and will document how someone's property will be divided when they die. Apprenticeship bonds are rare, but they do sometimes appear in deed books, specifically if someone is being released from their apprenticeship and they want to document that with the county they're living in. The term bound and apprenticed or apprentice will appear. Sometimes race is mentioned, sometimes it isn't, but because in many slave states, children of mixed race were and free mothers of color were required to enter an apprenticeship. They were considered orphans if the father did not recognize them. The father frequently did not. And so we include apprenticeship, even though it's distinct from slavery, just as a record that can be important for persons of color. Then we come to partition in kind and partition by sale. When a slaveholder died without a will, or the will simply stated that the property should be divided among heirs, a partition document was drawn up. Partition in kind lists the property and mentions which heir specifically gets which property or which amount of money. And in a partition by sale, the property is sold, usually at auction, and then the money from the sale is divided. If there are complex deeds with multiple grantees and numerous enslaved people, each entry will have an identical document ID number, but there will be a different row in the spreadsheet for each grantee. So the aim is to trace the movement of enslaved people from one slaveholder to another. So if you have one grantor giving different enslaved people to different grantees, that row helps them stay connected in the database. That concludes the document information, and then we move on to the people. The grantor and grantee are listed as last comma first name. If there are multiples, they are separated by a semicolon. Location, if the locations of the grantor and grantee are given, they should be provided in as much detail as possible. So if it says Greensboro, Guilford County, North Carolina, if it just says Guilford County, North Carolina, and if no location is specified, enter not stated. AFSD shows up frequently. It's an abbreviation for aforesaid. So it would be I, John Doe of the county and state aforesaid. So that would be mentioning the state and county that are listed at the top of the deed. Then we get to the names and ages of the enslaved people. This gets one cell, and for the names, they're separated by semicolon, and then the ages are entered in the same order as the names. So the database will connect these back together. So if we have 4 people, we want 4 ages entered. If there's no age given, it's a 0. And if it's given in months, just add MO. So 40, 11, 5, 18 months. The zeros are placeholders. So for example, if only 2 of these people had their age given, you would use the 0 as a placeholder so that the correct age ends up linked with the correct person in the database. So then we have gender and age circa category. So whether they are a child or an adult. Gender is indicated by the words man or boy and woman or girl, and can sometimes be inferred from name, but we want to be cautious in inferring gender from name, as some names have been gendered differently in the past than they are now. Child and adult is based on the age, but if no age is given, it is inferred from use of man or woman refers to an adult, but boy or girl may have been applied to either a child or an adult. There are a lot of cases where slaveholders referred to fully grown adults, men and women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, as boy or girl. And the term child, we assume to consistently refer to a child. The final set of data is the amount and currency. So enter the amount listed in the deed in one column, 500 for example, and the currency in the currency field, dollars, pounds, etc. So if you're doing transcription, your first transcription assignment will be a set of 6 practice deeds. Once you complete these, you can notify your project organizer, who will provide you with feedback and a set of deeds to transcribe. I generally recommend that people who are new to working with historical documents start out with locate and label. That'll give you a chance to get familiar with the handwriting and the structure and content of the deed, of the deeds, so that you're more comfortable with transcription once you move on to that.